Come Drink With Me is a super cool film. Cheng Peipei and Yueh Hua, a pair that I'd rank up there with Bogey and Bacall or Hepburn and Tracy, they're both at their best in this movie. Yueh Hua is roguish. He's hiding his stalwart heroism and Errol Flynn-style swashbuckling behind a goofy, unshaven mask. Cheng is driven by purpose. She's guarded, but she's humane. The bad guys are a roster of the Shaw Brothers' great villains. Ku Feng has a tiny role, Chang Hun-lit plays the creepy androgynous guy, as always, and Li Wan-chung, who I honestly always refer to as Red Foreman because he looks like Kurtwood Smith, is useless and annoying as Smiling Tiger, and though it takes the whole movie before he shows up, Yuan Chiching is fearsome as the abbot with a grudge against Yueh Hua. The plot is negligible. Some bandits have kidnapped a guy, and Cheng Peipei is assigned to track them down. Along the way, she picks up a ne'er-do-well beggar as her ally, and then lots of fights ensue. The movie's best known for a scene where Cheng Peipei lays waste to a whole inn full of villains. The plot pretty much stops. It's like a dance scene in an MGM musical. All we get is the camera circling slowly around Cheng and some discordant percussion. It's like King Hu is intentionally trying to remind us that wuxia films are just as much modernized Chinese opera as they are Western media with Chinese costumes and actors and themes. As King Hu told Le Cahiers de Cinema later on, he really wanted a dancer as his star because he had absolutely no interest in kung fu. But he did value choreography, and so Cheng Peipei, who was a young dancer with only a couple musicals and bit parts under her belt, was ideal to play Golden Swallow in this movie. This scene's obviously paid tribute to in Crouching Tiger. It's hard not to think about it during Kill Bill, although obviously there's Japanese antecedents there. But definitely in closer Shaw Brothers films like The Black Tavern, it has a huge influence. And this movie's often quoted as the feminist broadside that opened up Hong Kong cinema as a place where women could be as valued as men. I've got some quibbles with that. 1960s Hong Kong cinema has a lot of curious gender play, long before Come Drink With Me came out. You've got spy flicks like Angel with the Iron Fist that cast Lily Ho as the female James Bond, Agent Ling Ling Jiu. But then they make her change outfits 20 times and she has to take part in a bikini contest. But is that really a but? More importantly, there's Ivy Ling Po, who earlier in the 60s made her mark by playing iconic male roles like Liang Shanbo, flipping the all-male traditions of Chinese opera on its head and becoming an international drag superstar. Middle-aged Taiwanese moms went to see The Love Etern repeatedly because they had the hots for Liang Shanbo. I mean, Ivy Ling Po. I have friends who watched Come Drink With Me when they were young Chinese girls back in the 70s, and they tell me that this was mind-blowing. It reminds me of the theologian Rudolf Bultmann, who said that the language of any era is, in fact, opaque to any other era. I'm a middle-aged American white dude 40 years later, and I have had the privilege of seeing what came after. Kara Hui, Michelle Yeoh, Cynthia Rothrock, even Zhang Ziyi and Shu Qi, who aren't really martial artists, but they play one in the movies. Context is a little hard to process. But 40 years later, the movie remains tremendously entertaining, and it hints that there's a lot going on underneath the surface. The second big set piece is a duel, which is absolutely loaded. Golden Swallow shows up at this old temple, and she's dressed for the first time in the movie as a woman, and she's confronted by the androgynous jade-faced assassin, who warns her that it would be disrespectful to duel on holy ground. She responds by jumping on the altar, kicking over the offerings, killing Jade-Face's underlings, and just desecrating the whole place. As if this religious stuff wasn't enough, her female clothing is almost immediately sliced off. No worries, she is left as demurely dressed as any Jedi, or considerably more dressed than Peter Pan. But then the jade-faced assassin declares that he's going to fight her on equal terms, meaning just as naked, and he throws off his own outer garments, which he then proceeds to use as a weapon. This is all very weird. Just run away, Golden Swallow. The patriarch, he's gonna get ya. And sure enough, she is saved repeatedly on the sly by drunken cat Yueh Hua, who's lurking behind the scenes. She hops over the fence, but not before being hit by a poisoned dart. She flees into the woods, and she never recuperates from this scene, either physically or narratively. Jade-Faced Assassin has skewered her. So, while my 21st century expectations kind of shrivel up here, it's helpful to know that this was all based on a Beijing opera called The Drunken Beggar, and audiences in 1966 may have been waiting all along for Yueh Hua to be revealed as the hero. After all, he's the more established star at the time, having done a couple of movies as Monkey King Sun Wukong Hong, in which Cheng Peipei really only shows up as a minor bad guy, and even then she's overshadowed by her fellow villains Pat Ting Hung and the fashion clothes horse Lily Ho. But for the modern viewer who's expecting the movie to be all Cheng Peipei all the time, it's weird to see her all but vanish from her own movie. The film's tone also shifts dramatically. They go from grimy on-location sets to this dreamlike Shaw Brothers soundstage, which comes complete with a fake waterfall and vaguely hallucinatory lighting. Golden Swallow has become a damsel in distress all of a sudden, and after some awkward negotiations, she allows Drunken Cat to suck the poison out of her chest. I mean, it's really her shoulder. She doesn't actually even need to disrobe noticeably for it to happen, and he's at it for about 5 seconds, which is much less time than it takes for them to argue about whether or not he should save her life. I'd like to point out that none of this is because of the actors nor the era. The Shaw Brothers made plenty of sleaze in the 1960s, and Yueh Hua looks perfectly at home in something like The Intimate Confessions of a Chinese Courtesan. Cheng Peipei struts her stuff in much smaller outfits during Hong Kong Nocturne. Nor can you blame the director. In his biggest hit, A Touch of Zen, King Hu has a couple people who barely know each other having sex in an abandoned temple. There's definitely an aversion to intimacy in this film. In their magical retreat, Golden Swallow slowly recuperates, but as Drunken Cat cares for her, he has to defend her. There's this wacky, kind of touching fight scene where he cradles her in his arms while fighting off thugs, but as tenderly as he holds her, Yueh Hua looks really uncomfortable. He looks obliged. Somewhere around here, the plot also utterly changes. Suddenly, it's about an argument between Drunken Cat and his former mentor over the Beggar Clan's bamboo staff. I mean, I love Yuan Chiqing, and I like Yueh Hua, but at the end of this film, they really lose my interest. I'm going to assume that my problems with this movie are because of the things that King Hu added which made it better. It's only in hindsight that we realize that Cheng Peipei is far more interesting than Yueh Hua, even on a good day. Probably what we're witnessing is King Hu's frustration multiplied by Cheng Peipei's talent. She went on to have a wonderfully successful career at the Shaw Brothers, which I'll address in a moment. King Hu, on the other hand, got fed up and he went off to Taiwan to work on the indie circuit. With more creative control, he went on and made Touch of Zen, which won the technical Grand Prix at Cannes. And this was happening at a time when no Chinese movie was getting international acclaim. Watching Touch of Zen, it's really easy to see all the things that he had hinted at in Come Drink With Me just flourishing. There's a heroine with a mysterious backstory. There's the ambiguous morality of all the Buddhist priests. There's a clever hero who we're never sure if we should root for or not. Drunken Cat in Come Drink With Me is both duplicitous and brave. In Touch of Zen, his trickery is given to the shady main character, who's a effete painter who laughs maniacally when he sets up tricks that slaughter dozens of enemy soldiers in cold blood. The bravery is all handed off to a couple of generals who essentially act as the heroine's wingmen. The traditional wuxia hero is moved to the background, and the shady trickster is given center stage. He's nagged by his mother, he sleeps with a hot chick, but he's never liked by his mother or the hot chick or us. Sex is treated as a biological imperative that once accomplished should be evaded. Children are the goal. Intimacy is an enemy. In Touch of Zen, the protagonist is alarmed that the beautiful stranger offers up her body, and then he's left with a baby to continue his family line, while she, after several bloody duels based on her political choices, disappears back into a monastic life. Come Drink With Me is far less explicit. It's never really clear why Drunken Cat is going out of his way to help Golden Swallow, beyond, they're both good guys and she's kind of hot. When she's poisoned, it takes a huge amount of persuasion before she lets Drunken Cat suck it out of her. She doesn't want him physically near her, or if she does, it's necessary for there to be life-threatening violence to make the intimacy necessary. At the finale, Yueh and Cheng part ways. He walks off with his little army of beggar children. Cheng leaves with her never-quite-explained army of hot chicks. And it's a primitive version of Touch of Zen, where the man is being charged with child-rearing, the woman retreats into a chosen asexual role. At least in Come Drink With Me, you kind of feel like Yueh Hua might be a good dad. So what exactly is Come Drink With Me trying to say? It's a lot harder to pin down than Touch of Zen, which has all the otherworldly ideals showcased in shot after shot. In Touch of Zen, triumph on earth is foolishness. Battles must be won, babies must be born, But ultimately, life is just a wheel of craziness, and you need salvation to get off. If Come Drink With Me suffers, it's because it tries to squeeze all its themes into a typical action movie format. The action scenes are great, but we never really get to know the protagonists enough to care about their goals. Regardless, it's hard to watch this movie without falling in love with both leads, and although Yueh Hua is never quite as interesting in any film without Cheng Peipei. So there is that one where Yueh Hua plays a trans Buddhist monk and his ex has a waterboarding chair with a swing next to it, and she kills him by chopping off her own arm and impaling him with it. That was pretty interesting. Besides that, you can pretty much assume that a Cheng Peipei Yueh Hua movie is just gonna be fun. For example, there's Brothers 5, which is a solid remake of The Sons of Katie Elder. Cheng Peipei plays the John Boy Luke Skywalker role. She reunites feuding brothers to save their town, and the brothers include Yueh Hua, Lo Lie, Ku Feng, and even Sammo Hung in a small role. Then they got together and made the Shadow Whip, which is as beautiful an exercise in style as you can make, just for the snowy landscapes alone. It is the Chinese Grand Silence. And if you've seen Shadow Whip, you need to go on and see The Lady Hermit, which has obvious influences on the Indiana Jones movies. And if you've seen The Lady Hermit, you need to go on and see The Black Tavern, which is a film that almost completely lacks a protagonist. It just has a series of bad guys, some of whom are hopping zombies. And then there's Raw Courage. And okay, Raw Courage is kind of boring. You could skip it, but it does include a random scene where Cheng Peipei and Yueh Hua disguise themselves as furries, and there's no explanation given whatsoever. But overall, the movies of Cheng Peipei give me hope for a world where, even in a studio factory, minus the psychological obsessions of King Hu, and with just a couple talented actors and the need to crank out 20 movies a year, even in all that nonsense, it's possible for an actress to make movies as a human being and not as a gender. It's like this little crazy bubble happened where Cheng Peipei was taken seriously. Her characters are never trying to prove something. And yeah, she's good looking, but the directors aren't obsessed with that. They don't even seem very interested in that. She's got a mission, and she's gonna go do her thing. So who gives a crap if she got a vagina? So, from my middle class, white, American 2020s male armchair, looking at Come Drink With Me, yeah, there's things I can pick apart. But the movie also introduced me to a couple of excellent actors and a director whose later works are really mind-blowing. And I can't quite shake the thought of how I feel whenever I see a little girl dressed up as Captain Marvel. I mean, was Captain Marvel any good as a movie? No, it pretty much sucked end to end. It was predictable and boring. And sure, I had quibbles with Come Drink With Me, but Captain Marvel had me checking my watch every 3 minutes to see how soon it was going to be over. But the fact is, we live in the real world. I live in the real world. That little girl dressed as Captain Marvel lives in the real world. And so the question I should be asking is not so much, is that movie that good? But will that girl's life be better because she saw Captain Marvel? And yeah, it will.